look here.
Hi, George.
Hi, Gary.
How are you? It's good to see you.
What are you doing over in my neighborhood?
I was driving down the street and I saw you out here doing your yard work. I thought I'd stop and say hi.
Well, hi.
Yeah, your yard looks great.
Well,
Gosh darn it.
It's a lot of work, but I kind of enjoy it.
I know what you're talking about. Yard work is not one of my favorite things either.
Me neither.
Boy, George, I'm just standing here looking at that hat of yours. Where in the world did you get
Isn't
that?
that a dandy?
That is pretty.
Well,
That is pretty.
the hat you can get any place. It's the eagle that you probably like.
That's what I like. That's exactly right. That
That's,
emblem on there.
I did that myself.
You really did?
Sure did.
Do you think you could teach me to do something like that? I don't have any artistic talent. I couldn't draw water, you know?
It's easy. This is just nothing more than one of them buckle fronts you can buy that's pre-embossed.
Well, how about teaching me sometime?
Yeah, anytime.
How about now?
How about now? I got yard work to do.
I'll tell you what, you teach me how to do that, I might maybe help you with your yard work.
You got a deal,
All
Gary.
right, let's go for it.
Yeah.
George, are you really sure I can do this stuff? Because like I told you outside, I don't have any artistic ability at all.
Gary, I have no doubt that you can do it. You're just like everybody else. First time they think about coloring leather, they get a little apprehensive. They say, oh my God, I'll ruin it.
That describes me. That describes me.
I'll tell you what, when I'm done with you today, you're going to see just how easy it is, because it's not difficult at all.
I'm ready to learn.
You ready to learn? Let me tell you about a few products here. First one I'm going to show you here is called Cova dye. Cova dye, funny name. Cova dye is a paint. Anyway, you look at it, we call it dye because everybody knows that you can't paint leather. Well, this is a paint especially designed for use on leather. It's opaque. It paints right on the surface. Just like any other paint would, or if you use acrylic paint on canvas or on paper. And it's a water-soluble product, real easy to use. As a matter of fact, we're going to use that to do the eagle.
That's the eagle is on your hat.
Sure thing. And next one I want to introduce you to is called Pro Dye. The main difference between Pro Dye and the Cova dye is the Pro dye is a penetrating dye. It soaks into the leather.
Soaks in.
Yeah. The Cova dye just adheres to the surface. The Pro dye sinks in.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, if you were going to re-dye your shoes, so you had black shoes and they got scuffed off, and you wanted to re-dye those shoes, we would recommend that you use Pro dye.
Because it penetrates through the other stuff that's on the shoe.
We would tell you to get some of it off, the old polish and all, but it would, this is what you use for solid color dyeing and other applications, but it penetrates very well. Another dye that's pretty much the same in that it's a penetrating dye is called Spectra Shade. The difference between the Pro dye and the Spectra Shade, the Pro dye has a solvent base. That's alcohol.
Okay.
Okay, that's what makes it penetrate.
I understand.
This has a water base. Same kind of a dye in that it penetrates. The colors are not near as dark with the Spectra Shade. We use that in artwork.
I got you. I got you.
Where and a lot of people use it where they're not allowed to have harmful vapors.
Like schools and places like that?
Places like that. So it's a good dye. It's not quite as rich as the Pro dye, but it's good dye. This is called antique leather stain. And why do we call it antique? Makes it look old.
You mean antique, it makes the leather look old?
Makes the leather look old, and it's a beautiful, beautiful finish. Very popular. Very easy to use. We'll show you how to use that also.
Okay.
Another one that's along the same lines is called Leather Glow. Leather Glow is sort of an antique finish. It's really kind of a finish that puts a very light color on your leather, but it enhances all your stamping and all the cuts that you make on leather. So that is, if you want to enhance it. Super Sheen. Now we're into the clear finishes.
This is the kind of stuff you put over these coloring agents. The
Yes,
dyes
right.
and the
Mhm.
Cova paint and that.
And we'll show you some tricks with some of this other stuff too. There's all
Okay.
kinds of tricks. We'll use this as a clear finish overall. We'll also use it as a resist. This is an acrylic finish, so it's got a water base.
Okay.
The last one we're going to show you here is called Neat Lack. This is actually a lacquer finish for leather.
I'll be darned.
Yep, you wouldn't think you could put lacquer on leather. It's the most protective of all the finishes.
Would that include waterproofing and that kind of thing?
Water, it makes it water resistant, not
Water resistant. I
nothing.
understand.
Leather can't really be made totally waterproof.
Okay.
I want to get started now. Look at, here's the buckle front I was telling you about. That's all
That's
pre-embossed.
what was on the top of your hat.
That was on top of my hat.
And we're going to start,
So-
that's what we start with to color this.
Why don't we get busy and get this thing colored up?
I'm ready to learn.
To do the eagle's head, Gary, we're going to first use this white cobra dye.
This is the opaque.
This is the opaque.
Covers the whole leather there.
We're going to cover the whole leather, except we're going to use it a little differently today. I'm shaking it up real well because we need to shake it up and get it mixed. It's a water-based product, so it does separate. And I like to
Okay.
use the cap. You'll see why in a minute. It's a lot easier than digging down in that bottle. Notice I'm getting just a little bit of dye on the brush.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take most of that off on this piece of scrap leather over here.
Why is that, George?
Well, you know, watch. When I go over here, I just want to skim over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And you see,
That
No,
works pretty dandy.
I'm
doesn't
not painting the side of a barn, so I just want to kind of skim over here. And you'll notice now, as I do this, notice every time I come out of there, I
Every
go
single
over
time.
here. Notice by skimming just over the top, the detail of the feathers is beginning to show.
You're kind of leaving the natural shading in by just going over the top.
Mm-hmm. I'm just skimming over the top.
That's pretty nifty.
Gary, now I'm taking the brush and I've twisted it to a point because I've got to do the tips of these feathers. As you know, an eagle, a bald eagle, has a white head feathers, but then they change to brown down on his neck.
Yeah, that brings up a question that's kind of running through my mind, George. How do you really know, which colors to use and where to use them?
Well, I have things I cut out of books. Every time I see a picture of something I think I might do sometime, I cut it out. Okay, I think we about got these tips. See, I had to be a little more deliberate there so that I got a nice point to the tips of the head feathers where they meet the neck feathers, because we're going to use a different color then on the neck feathers. Tell you what, since we have the white out, let's show you how to do the sky. Although the sky, we use a mixture of both white and light blue.
White and light blue.
White and light blue.
Well, okay.
Okay.
You're throwing some stuff at me here.
All right.
Well,
Well,
how do you go about mixing these things up?
that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to mix them. And we'll just
Okay.
take some white and we'll add some light blue to it. But I'm going to cheat because I've got a bottle over here already made. I do an awful lot of these eagles.
Well, how do you know, back up to this mixing, how do you know how much white to put in the blue to make the color that you're getting at?
You just, by trial and error, I take some white, put a few drops of blue in there, in this case light blue,
Okay.
and if I'm happy with it, it's fine. If I think it's too light, I put more blue in. I think it's too dark, I put some white in.
So you don't have to really worry about any real complicated formula or
No
anything like
complicated
that.
formulas.
Well, that makes it easy.
No. Okay, let's put some of this blue on. First thing we need to do is shake it up. One thing you need to remember now, I'm going from white to light blue, so I don't have to worry about my brush too much. However, if I were going from white to yellow, I would need to wash my brush.
Because it's different basic colors.
And this is a water-based dye. So remember my cup I had a while ago?
Yeah, I saw you with that over there.
Just wash the brush right in plain old tap water and dry it with a paper towel. Now we're ready to apply some of the sky blue. In this case, I'm going to apply it a lot heavier. I do take the excess off on my scrap because I get worried about too much extra dye around. But I'm going to put this in fairly solid as opposed to just skimming over the surface. And after we get this all done, we can come back and put a little more white on some of the clouds back there just to outline them clouds. Okay, now that we've got the blue, sky blue finish, Gary, we'll clean the brush over here. See that paper towel. Thank you. Dry that thing up. Okay, now we'll do the beak. And just like the sky, I got a bottle here that says beak yellow.
Beak yellow.
Beak
All
yellow,
right.
look at that.
I wonder what you use that on, George.
I use that on the beaks. I'll tell you what, this is a mixture of yellow, white, and a little bit of brown. Just like the other.
Just like your sky blue, you kind of...
You got to play it by ear and just... Okay, here we go. Just a little bit on the brush. I'm going to be careful now. Here, I'm going to actually paint. Kind of like we did the sky blue. We want a little... We're going to paint it.
Be careful on this one.
Being careful, but it's not like the neck feathers. We actually want this to be fairly solid color, so we paint it. You can, if you want to, Gary, go back over and give these things a second coat anytime you feel like it. As a matter of fact, if you get off a little bit onto the blue here, get some yellow on the blue,
Yeah.
you can come back later and paint right over that with the light blue.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad to know that because I probably need that knowledge as a beginner. I just suspect I might get a little on the blue.
Okay, it doesn't take long to do the beak, does it?
No, sir.
I'm rather satisfied with the beak. So why don't we do the mountains? You want to open up that light green dye there for me, Gary?
Sure. Open up.
While you're doing that, I'll wash the brush.
And you just kind of want the cap right in front of you, there, right?
That's all. Just
Well,
give me that
put
cap
that
right there.
and-
We'll dip in the cap. And as always, I'm going to paint here kind of like I did the body feathers. Just skim over the top. Just ever so lightly.
Is that hard to learn to do, George, or just kind of a light touch does it?
Just a light touch, really. Like I said, we're just skimming over the top. Now I'll take, how about some of that dark green?
Dark green. Let me see all your colors.
Clean the
over
brush.
here. You told me to shake this up real good.
You always shake it up.
Okay. And you work out of the cap.
They work
There's
out of the cap. Okay. With the dark green, I'm going to put a very little bit down in the valleys of these mountains. That's all I want to do. I just want to darken up the valleys.
Oh, that makes a nice shading.
Gives it dimension. Gives you depth.
Wow.
Just a little bit. Notice I'm going with a very dry brush.
Very dry brush. That means you're taking a lot of the paint off of it before you use it.
Most of the
I
paint
see.
comes off before I touch the leather. Okay, how about some medium brown? We'll do these.
Medium brown.
We'll do the body feathers. We had the head and the neck, and now we'll get the medium brown and do this.
You're over here
These
all
body
shook
feathers.
up and give you a cap full of medium brown, sir.
Tell you what I'm going to do, Gary. I'm going to turn this around because here again, like we did a while ago with the neck feathers from the head.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to get in here in these very narrow points. So you notice I pointed the brush, put it in, put it on the leather, twist it, and then get in these points. After we get all those points done, we'll go sort of to the dry brush method and just drag over the top. Kind of like we did the head with the white. Drag over the top. Later on, we'll come back and show you some finishing tricks that will really make these feathers stand out. Okay, Gary, that looks pretty good. Let's do the eye now. Why don't you give me that bottle of yellow over there?
All right. Shake it thoroughly.
Well, I always got to shake
I'm
it.
getting that part down pretty good here, George. And there is your cap fall.
Okay, now here's a case where we need to very carefully tip that point because this is a small area we've got to get into here. Very carefully. Got to get good coverage on this. Okay, how about some black?
Some black. Okay. Shake it up. And there is your black.
Okay, I got to get a tiny little drop of black and put right in the center.
That sure
All
makes
right.
a difference. That just brings it alive.
Sure does, doesn't it? Now we can put this aside to dry, and we'll do some more work on it later. Gary, do you remember what I told you about Pro Dye?
Pro Dye is a penetrating dye with a solvent base.
That's right, sure is. Solvent meaning, you know, there is some alcohol, so there'll be some vapors. It's a good idea to use a ventilated room to do this. Also, you notice I've got some newspaper down here.
Yes, sir.
That's in case of an accident.
And not want to get it on the furniture.
It will penetrate the furniture as well.
I'll remember that for sure.
We'll protect the furniture a little bit. This is real easy to use. This particular one I'm going to do is for a policeman, and you know they like this basket weave design.
Oh yes.
But most of the time they're regulated by the colors. They have to either have it black or brown. So let's just put some black on here. I'm using a dauber. This is just a wool dauber, taking some of the dye off on the edge of the bottle because I don't want to come out here and be dripping when I come out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of putting this on. See how it soaks in? It just
Boy, that just goes in slick.
soaks it up like a sponge. Make
Yes.
sure I get good coverage. Notice I'm going in a circular motion and going over and over and over because I want to get good penetration and good solid coverage. We could, if we wanted to now, for this black, if you wanted a richer, more gunmetal black, you could give it a coat of blue or green first, and that would kill some of the natural brown of the leather. Well, we're just about have this covered, Gary. After we have it covered completely to satisfy ourselves, I'm going to put this aside and let it dry. If after it dries, we're going to buff it off. We'll use a piece of sheep wool. This is just nothing more than a piece of scrap sheep wool. You could use a cloth, but sheep wool works better.
Why do you want to buff it at this point, George?
You want to buff it because there are excess pigments laying on the surface there.
Just kind of like dust.
Just kind of like dye dust, yeah.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll buff it off after it's dry, and then we can look at it, and if we're satisfied, we can then put on our finish. And if we're not satisfied, we can give it another coat of dye.
Add some more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, you know, the buffing is real easy just after it's dry, which would normally be longer than we're taking today. You just very simply buff it, and you'll notice it's starting to take up some sheen already. That's because that stuff's disappearing. Another use for pro dye, Gary, is background dyeing.
Background.
Right. In other words, I can get a much nicer contrast on this billfold back if I dye the background in here a darker color.
All right.
Let me show you how to do that. First thing I'm going to do is use a good brush, and I dip into the dye, take some of it off the edge of the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make contact right in the middle because did you notice there I get a little bleeding?
Is that why you start in the center?
That's why I started in the center. Then as the brush begins to dry out, I'll go to the borders, as you can see, and then as it's almost dry, I can work down into the points.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to notice it may be a little awkward sometimes to get a good brush angle.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, you just turn the leather until you have a comfortable brush angle. Well, we're just about finished, Gary.
That sure does enhance the contrast of that background and your tooled portions.
Makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Certainly
It really
does, George.
It really stands out now. Tell you what, I've got to clean the brush.
What's that stuff you're using to clean that brush?
I am using Pro Dye solvent. Remember, this is a
Dye
solvent dye where we could use plain water to clean the brush with the COVID dye. Here we've got to use solvent. And then I like to dry it on a paper towel. You can also tell if you've got all the dye out of it, you may have to go back in until you're sure that the brush is clean.
I suppose you don't want to leave brown in a brush there. You're going to use for blue or something
That's
like
correct,
that.
yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Just like we did with the black one, after we set this aside to dry, we'll buff it to get any excess
Get some
pigment
dust
off of
off,
there.
okay.
Sure enough. Here's another method of using Pro Dye, Gary.
That's quite a tool you have there, George. What is that?
Well, we call this the block dyeing method, and we call this a block, although it's really not a block. It's just a sponge that I've covered, plain old sponge that I've covered with some old T-shirt material.
For heaven's sakes.
So we call it block dyeing, but it's really not a block. And of course, I use these a lot, so I fixed this up with masking tape so that the material stays in place.
Okay.
You'll see why that's important in a minute.
All right.
First thing we're going to do now is get a little dye, and here again, anytime you use these daubers, take a good bit of that dye off on the edge of the bottle.
And so you don't splatter all over.
So you don't splatter. Just a few drops on here, that's all.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm going to blot that on a paper towel
Uh-huh.
until it's almost dry. Then when it's almost dry, I'm going to very carefully rub along the edge. I'm gradually build up the color and gradually move in toward the roses and all that I've stamped in there, those roses. And
I noticed now that those roses and the leaves are colored with the Kova acrylic dye. And now you're using this solvent-based Pro Dye. I didn't realize you could mix those, George.
Oh yes, that's you sure can. You can later on when I show you how to do some finishing. We can talk about that some more. But actually, we don't want to get into it now. But you can, as long as you use the right finish, there are no problems. Now, as you can see, we have created a nice blue border on here.
That just made all the difference in the world of that. It was
Didn't it?
pretty when you started, and just made it a whole different product there.
I'm going to also take my dauber and dye this edge now.
Uh-huh.
And now we got a nice continuity of color going right around the edge. This is going to be a beautiful piece when we're finished.
I sure am learning that it is not nearly as difficult to do as I would have thought it was.
I told you it was easy, didn't I?
You didn't lie to me,
I
George.
didn't lie. Like any other thing now, when we finish something like this,
You want to buff it off.
we'll buff it
Buff
off.
it off with your sheepskin.
Sure will. Get rid of any excess pigment. And we can put this aside for finishing. This Spectra shade's a lot of fun to work with, Gary. It's real easy. You just paint it on.
I notice you're starting in the center and working out again, George.
Sure do. That's it is a penetrating dye. It's not like that Cova dye, which was a paint, so we need to, it will bleed. We need to be careful and have a semi-dry brush when we get up to the edges. There we go. That takes care of our rosebuds. Now I'm going to clean my brush in water.
You're using water this time to clean your brush, not a solvent.
That's right. This is a water-based dye, even though it's a penetrating dye. It's water-based, so we can just clean up in water.
Mm-hmm.
If you want, we can clean up in soapy water.
Won't hurt anything.
Won't hurt a thing.
Great.
It does help clean the brush. Now we're going to go to green.
I notice you still kind of unload your brush before you put it on the
right.
water there.
Mm-hmm. If you have an accident, you'll soon learn that that's the best way to do it. So we'll just start in the center, work out toward the edges. Shade dyeing is a lot easier than you think it is, Gary.
Well, I look at that, and that looks a little scary, George.
Well, it scares most people, but if you just follow a few rules and a little bit of instruction from me, I'll make you an expert at it.
All right.
Actually, shade dyeing can be done with either Spectra dye or Pro dye.
Doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter. We'll do a little bit today with Pro dye. And you can do it with any color.
Mm-hmm.
Any color you want to do on your leather, you can mix it the same way as we're going to mix this dark brown today. We're going to use 3 shades of dye. We're going to use 3-to-1 mixture. 3
Okay.
parts solvent to 1 part dye.
Okay.
We're going to use a half and half.
2 to 1 or 1 to 1?
1 to 1.
1 to 1. Okay.
1 to 1. And we're going to use some full strength. So we'll need to mix the first 2.
Okay.
And the best way to do that is with an eyedropper. So let's do a little mixing now, Gary.
Okay.
You can, by the way, use a straw instead of a medicine dropper or an eyedropper if you want.
Just
And
any way. Huh?
Then they're disposable.
Okay.
These you need to clean in the solvent after.
All right.
All right, the first thing I'll do, I'll take, rather than drops, I just take a whole dropper full and go 1, 2, 3.
All right.
Now I can put
3
1
parts.
solvent in there, okay, or 1
One
part
dye.
dye.
Yeah.
hmm This is going to be half and half,
Oh.
so I'll just put 1. Now, this is a good way to mix. I can now come back and put 1 dye in each bottle,
And you're perfect.
and I'm perfect.
That makes sense to me.
You notice that I did all my solvent first.
Yes.
That way I don't have to be back and forth cleaning my dropper.
Okay.
1,
1 in there. And 1
1.
in there.
Now if you just use the dropper, you can mix these, and we're ready to go. We have the 3 that we need, and we'll clean the dropper
In the salt.
in solvent.
That's pretty slick, George.
Isn't that pretty slick?
Yep.
So now let's do this horse. Gary, do you notice that I've labeled my bottles?
Yes.
I do that for a couple of reasons. One, I save the mixture. I make enough usually to do a few projects.
Well, I hadn't thought of that.
Also, it makes me stay in the right bottle with my brush, because we're going to put these 3 different strengths of dye on separately, and if we would get the wrong bottle, we might mess our
And
project up a
all the
little bit.
bottles look the same, don't they?
They all look the same, so I've labeled it. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is make sure the dye is the color we want it, and we do that by testing it on scrap leather.
You use a lot of scrap leather when you're coloring leather, don't
Sure
you?
do.
You always test.
Always test. If it's just like when we did the acrylic dye, the Cova
Yes.
dye, if it's too dark,
You can lighten it up
we
with your
lighten it up
solvent.
with solvent.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get started. I'm gonna come out and take most of the dye off on the scrap leather, and I'll start stroking from the darker areas toward the lighter areas.
Uh-huh.
Every time we come out, we get rid of most of the dye, go on to the project, and do you notice that I'm laying the brush down? I'm not using the tip. I'm letting the brush spread out.
Oh, I see what you're
See
talking
this?
about. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'm also stroking with the flow of the hair. And I always work from the dark areas toward the light areas. Work in these dark areas and keep stroking with the flow of the hair. Notice, Gary, that I've left some highlights here.
Yes.
I've stroked it from the deeper areas or the darker areas
Where the shadows would be? I see.
toward the highlights. Yep.
Well, George, how do you, again, I'll ask the question, how do you know what's to be highlighted and what's to be dark and all the shadings that you've got there?
The simplest way I know is to get into my gallery of pictures that I collect out of magazines and things. I have a lot of pictures of horses in various poses. This particular one, a picture of the finished one that has been dyed, comes with the pattern.
Oh.
So many times the patterns that are available work just great. Let's take and put a little blaze on the forehead here. You notice that he's sort of got a blaze here, and if we outline it with the brush, we can make it look real good. Oh boy, how about that?
Kind of a diamond-shaped blaze right there.
Sure. And maybe I need to soften it up a little bit. It looked almost like it was painted on there. So this is about all we'll do with this first mixture. It's now time to get into the next mixture, the half and half. Make sure I close up the first one and get it out of here, because from this point on I don't really want to be back in there. Now we use this half and half, one dye and one solvent.
You're not washing your brush out in between these.
No, I don't have to, because it's really the same color, it's just a different strength. Now I've got a stronger color, and by the way, I need to check it also on scrap leather before I use it.
Just like you did before.
Just like I did before. And we're going to apply it in the darker areas and come out toward the highlights, but we're not going to come out as far. We're going to stay just in the deeper areas now. And this will add tremendously to the depth of our figure, as you'll notice already around the jaw line how it's beginning to take more shape just by putting this darker color in here. Well, Gary, we're just about finished with this shade. A little touch up here and there. Well, what do you think?
I think that is really very, very nice, George.
Let's take a little bit of full strength now. We don't use much full strength. Very, very little. Now I'll show you where we're going to use the full strength. We're going to use it, in this case, on the mane and the forelock. See how, as I drag over here with a semi-dry brush, how it brings out the hair?
It just stands completely out away from it.
If I got too wet with my brush, it would soak down in the cuts and not bring out the hairlines. Very carefully, I'm going to do the mane. In this particular horse, the mane's laying on the other side of the head. A lot of times, you'll have the mane laying on this side of the head, so you have more of this type of thing to paint.
Very dry brush and
Very dry.
gently on the top.
just gently drag over the top. Very carefully now, I'm going to do the nostril, just the deepest part of the nostrils, really.
Makes all the difference in the world.
Makes all the
George.
difference in the world. Now we're going to do the thing that's really going to make the difference in this horse. We're going to do the eye. Very carefully, I have pointed my brush. I've got to very carefully go in the eye, making sure that I just do the eyeball. I'm going to leave a highlight in there, Gary. You know why?
Well, why?
That's called the gleam in his eye. Just a little spot there in the middle. And as you can see, what looked like a blind horse before has suddenly come to life. Gary, the time has come to show you a little bit about finishing leather.
Well, George, I'm glad of that because you've been talking about finishing leather all afternoon and I haven't the vaguest idea what you're talking about.
Well, really, what we're going to do is put a coating on here, a protective coating, that will do that. It'll protect. It will also enhance the beauty.
Oh.
We'll use a couple of different kinds of finishes. The easiest and most safe to use is this super sheen. Super sheen is nothing more than an acrylic finish. It's a clear acrylic finish. We just get a little bit on this sheep wool pad. Notice that I have prepared these sheep wool pads ahead of time. This finish we just wipe on. Not necessary to rub, just wipe.
Okay.
Matter of fact, if you rub, you'll bring up a whole bunch of bubbles. So it's better to just wipe it on, making sure we get coverage all the way around. There we are. It's just about perfect. And when it dries,
even coverage.
when it dries, it'll be have a beautiful, beautiful sheen to it. It'll be protected, and it'll have a nice color to it.
Well, great.
Okay, let's take the next piece here, which was one that we had an awful lot of color on there. Notice that?
It's the one that you did the block dyeing on the edge. Now, here's where you had two different kinds, and you were going to tell me about that.
Right.
You got Kova dye, which is the acrylic, and you have Pro dye, which was the solvent-based dye.
Right. So in this case, we'll need to use an acrylic finish. If we tried to use a lacquer finish on here, it would dissolve the Kova dye and pull it. So we'd have a mess
that wouldn't be
on
too
our
good.
hands. No. So we'll use the acrylic. The acrylic works fine over the Pro dye, and it also will not affect the Kova dye in any way, shape, or form. Just wipe it on. This will also make these colors a lot more vivid. And when it dries, you'll see it. Lacquer finish can be applied in two ways. It can be applied with a piece of sheep wool, just like we did the other, or it can be applied with a spray can.
What would be the difference in this convenience?
Just convenience,
Okay.
yeah. I like to apply it by hand because it's very important that we get a good, deep penetration with this.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, so let's get a little bit of this on the pad. And instead of just wiping, I'm going to rub. Remember I said I need to rub it in?
Yes, sir.
I need to get it down in there. You continue to rub until the pad is almost dry. Just keep on rubbing. This is very fast drying.
I can see that.
It is the most protective of all the finishes. As you can see, it also darkens the leather somewhat.
It sure does.
Now remember that one we did a while ago for the policeman?
Yes, sir. The black
Well,
basket weave.
Their things tend to get a lot more abuse than the things of the average person, so we'll use lacquer finish on it. Now, you can use a lacquer finish on here because, remember what kind this was?
That was a penetrating solvent dye.
So it's all right to use the lacquer on here. Got to keep on rubbing, make sure I get it rubbed in completely.
Boy, that'll dry just nice, won't it?
This will be beautiful, and it'll be very, very durable. Gary, applying antique stain is a lot like applying wood stain.
Well, I've done that job before, George.
It's just a matter of getting some on a sheep wool pad and rubbing it onto the leather. Got to make sure that we get down in all the tool impressions.
All the cracks and crevices and nooks and crannies.
I'm surprised you haven't said anything about how messy this looks, you know.
It's the first thing that you've done today that looked like you were just, you didn't have to worry about your detail too much.
Most time when the people see this for the first time, they say, "Oh my God, you ruined it." Well, we really didn't.
I've been around you all afternoon. I have confidence in
Do
you.
we really?
Yeah, right.
We have good coverage now. We'll take a paper towel and wipe off the excess. And let this dry for a few minutes. And then we'll take a sponge with plain water in it.
Plain right out of the tap.
Right out of the tap water. And we're going to very lightly skim over the top of this.
Wow.
See what happens?
Gee, many Christmas.
Isn't that nice?
That's all the difference in the world.
Let me turn it around here.
I noticed you squeezed most of the excess water out of that sponge. Is that so it won't wash out any of the color that's in the cracks there?
That's right. We want the color to be down in the tool impressions,
That just turned out so pretty.
but not all over. So it gives you a beautiful, beautiful stain. Gives you a beautiful, beautiful high contrast to your work.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Now, what do you do with it next, George?
Well, after this, we would let this dry, buff it off with a clean sheep wool pad, and then apply a clear finish to it. In this case, we would apply the super sheen.
Wow, that sounds easy enough. You know, George, we've been doing all this. Whatever happened to my hat emblem?
Oh, your eagle.
That's where we started out on this whole thing.
Well, I'll tell you what, I took you to this point because I wanted you to learn how to use antique and all these things.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you some tricks now with finishing. Gary, what I've done is painted super sheen all over your eagle here. In fact, we painted it all around in here, and we're going to call this resist.
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 Now, why on earth do you call it resist?
We call it resist because it's going to resist what I'm going to do next.
Okay.
Next thing I'm going to do is apply some antique finish over top of this. And you be prepared for a little magic because what's going to happen here is going to darken in all the deep areas of the tooling. It's going to leave, wherever the resist is, it's going to wipe off, but it's going to leave you a nice dark border.
I look forward to seeing
Look
this.
forward to it, okay?
I've been waiting for this all afternoon, George.
The antique is applied in the same manner. We just get it on a sheep wool pad, rub it on, and again, we're making a mess. But we can take care of that.
It's kind of fun part of it for people who like to make a mess, isn't it?
Yeah. Now we'll wipe off. Oh my goodness, look at here.
See what you were talking about. That color stays in, but it kind of just mutes it down, doesn't it?
Mutes it down. Let me take the sponge now. I'm going to very lightly skim over the top. And Gary, you have a pretty good looking eagle there.
Well, that's not pretty good. That's beautiful.
Isn't it? Well, all we have to do is lace it up and get it on your hat.
Well,
Okay, let me show you some other tricks. Here's one we've done, covering some of the things we've already talked about. This particular one, we put Cova dye on here and on here. Then we resisted inside of these two ovals. Now watch what happens when we antique this.
Okay. Well, it's like when I was a kid going to the magic show.
Isn't this nice? This is the fun part. You know, we worked all day to get to this point. What do we do next?
You wipe off.
Paper towel.
Yes. Yes.
If you want the antique to be kind of dark, you can quit right here, and you have a nice piece.
Again, that's pretty.
Let's try this belt strip we have here. This is a sample I like to make for selling.
You don't have any color at all on that.
No color, but I did paint some resist. I resisted this area in here, in here, on the truck. I did nothing on those letters.
Oh.
Watch this one. Wipe.
That's
magic time.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's take a sponge and brighten that up even a little more.
Wipe off the excess a little bit.
Beautiful piece.
That is pretty, George.
Isn't that something? Remember this one?
And we've seen that a couple or three times today, haven't we?
All right. Well, this is a little different.
What did you do to this one now?
I remember we put Cova dye in here. We put Pro dye on here using the block method.
Yes.
And do you remember then that we coated this entire piece
overall
with super sheen? All I'm going to do now, and you've got to watch carefully, all I'm going to do is enhance all the stamping and cutting.
Okay.
With the antique finish going over the top, making sure I get good coverage down in all the impressions. I'm going to wipe with my paper towel.
My goodness.
And voila! What a difference, huh?
That sure is nice.
I can leave it, or I can take my sponge. I can lighten it up even more. Beautiful piece.
Yes, it is.
Let's try another one. Remember this one? This is one.
Go ahead.
This is the one that we used the Spectra Shade dye on the yellow and green. While you weren't looking, I coated this entire thing with the lacquer finish.
Oh.
Now watch what happens. Making sure that I get it good coverage all over. Paper towel. Notice how nice the roses come up now?
You've still got a lot of color in there, but they're kind of muted down a little bit. They blend together.
Sure are.
More nice.
It gives you that beautiful leather look as opposed to that
some nice shadow. Some nice natural shadow in the rose petals and the leaves.
Okay. Ann would be proud of that piece.
Well, George, I really want to thank you for teaching me all this about all the coloring and finishing leather. You've taught me a tremendous amount this afternoon, and it sure doesn't scare me the way it did before. I'm
Well,
really excited about this.
It really was a lot easier than you thought it was.
Yes, it
wasn't
certainly was. It certainly was.
Well, I tell you what, I've enjoyed having you over, Gary. It's
Thank
been
you.
a ball. Tell you what, though, if you want to really learn about coloring of leather, this book by Al Stoneman is probably one of the best you'll ever get your hands on.
I'll pick one of those up.
And I want to tell you something else.
What's that?
It's time to do the yard work.
Oh boy, I did make a promise. And
Yes,
I'll tell
you
you what,
did.
George, I was going to try to stiff you on that part of it. But you've taught me so much this afternoon that I feel honor bound to help you out. So I'm yours.
Well, let's get at it.
Okay, sir.